The morning sun cast long shadows across my backyard as I stood at the kitchen window, nursing my second cup of coffee and watching the demolition crew prepare to remove our old in-ground pool. After 15 years of maintenance headaches, chlorine, burns, and astronomical utility bills, my wife Sarah and I had finally decided it was time to reclaim our yard for something more practical, maybe a vegetable garden or a play area for our golden retriever, Max. "They're here early," Sarah observed, joining me at the window with her own steaming mug. The crew had arrived at 7 sharp, just as promised, their heavy machinery already rumbling to life in our driveway. "Better early than late," I replied, though I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was about to go sideways. Call it intuition, or maybe it was the way our neighbor Karen Henderson was already positioned on her back deck, arms crossed, wearing that familiar scowl that had become as much a fixture of our neighborhood as the old oak tree between our properties. Karen had moved in next door 3 years ago with her 2 kids, Tyler, age 10, and Madison, age 8, and had immediately appointed herself the unofficial neighborhood watch commander. Every package delivery, every lawn mowing session, every time we so much as sneezed too loudly, Karen was there with her disapproving glare and her phone ready to document what she considered suspicious activity. The pool removal had been planned for months. We'd pulled permits, notified all the neighbors, including Karen, who had responded with a lengthy email about property value concerns and noise ordinances, and hired Henderson Brothers Demolition, ironically, sharing a surname with our problematic neighbor, though thankfully no relation. As the crew chief, a weathered man named Bill Henderson, approached our back door, I noticed Karen's kids had wandered into their backyard. Tyler was bouncing a basketball against the fence that separated our properties, while Madison was riding her bike in tight circles on their patio. Both kids kept glancing toward our yard with barely contained excitement. "Morning, folks," Bill said when I opened the door. "We'll start by draining what's left of the water, then we'll bring in the excavator to break up the concrete. Should take most of the day, but we'll have you cleaned up and ready for whatever comes next by evening." "Sounds perfect," I said, shaking his calloused hand. "Just let us know if you need anything." As Bill walked back toward his crew, I noticed Karen had moved closer to the fence line, her phone already in hand. She was wearing her usual uniform of pressed khakis and a polo shirt, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe ponytail that seemed to pull her entire face tight with permanent displeasure. The first few hours went smoothly. The crew worked efficiently, draining the remaining pool water through a series of hoses that snaked across our yard and into the street storm drain. The rhythmic hum of pumps and the occasional shout of coordination between workers created an oddly soothing soundtrack to what I'd expected to be a chaotic day. Around 10:30, things began to shift. Tyler and Madison had been watching the operation with increasing fascination, their basketball and bike forgotten as they pressed their faces against the chain-link fence that separated our properties. What started as innocent curiosity began to evolve into something more problematic. "Hey, can we help?" Tyler called out to one of the younger crew members who was coiling hoses near the fence. "Sorry, buddy, insurance won't allow it," the worker replied kindly. "But it's pretty cool to watch from where you are." That's when Karen emerged from her house like a storm cloud given human form. "Tyler, Madison, get away from that fence right now," she barked, her voice carrying the particular blend of authority and hysteria that had become her trademark. "You don't know what kind of chemicals are in that water." The kids reluctantly backed away, but I could see the disappointment in their faces. They'd been cooped up in the house for most of the summer, and this was probably the most exciting thing to happen in their neighborhood in months. By noon, the real demolition began. The excavator, a massive yellow beast that barely fit through our side gate, rumbled to life with a diesel growl that made the ground vibrate. Bill operated it with the precision of a surgeon, the metal claw biting into the concrete with satisfying cracks that echoed through the neighborhood. That's when the first incident occurred. Madison had been playing with a frisbee in her backyard, when an errant throw sent it sailing over the fence into our yard, landing perilously close to where the excavator was working. Without hesitation, and apparently without her mother's knowledge, the 8-year-old squeezed through a gap in the fence that I hadn't even noticed existed. "Whoa there, little lady!" Bill called out, immediately shutting down the excavator, as Madison darted across our torn-up yard to retrieve her toy. That's not safe! I rushed outside just as Karen came tearing around the corner of her house, having spotted her daughter's great escape. "Madison Elizabeth Henderson!" she shrieked, her voice hitting a pitch that made Max whimper and retreat into the house. "What do you think you're doing?" "I just wanted my frisbee back," Madison said, her lower lip beginning to tremble as she realized the magnitude of trouble she was in. "Sir," Karen said, wheeling on me with blazing eyes, "your construction crew has created an attractive nuisance that's endangering my children. This is a serious liability issue." "Karen, she climbed through your fence," I said as calmly as I could manage. "We can't be responsible for—" "Don't you dare lecture me about responsibility," she snapped, pulling out her phone. "I'm documenting this entire conversation. Your reckless demolition project has created unsafe conditions that are spilling over onto my property and threatening my family's safety." Bill, who had climbed down from the excavator, approached with the diplomatic smile of someone who dealt with difficult neighbors before. "Ma'am, we're following all safety protocols. The work area is clearly marked, and we've got barriers up where appropriate. Kids are curious, I get it, but we can't control what happens on your side of the fence." "Barriers?" Karen laughed, a sharp sound devoid of humor. "What barriers? I see machinery operating within feet of a residential fence line with no regard for the safety of adjacent properties." I looked around our yard, trying to see it through Karen's eyes. The crew had set up orange cones and caution tape around the immediate work area, but admittedly, the operation was large-scale and messy. Chunks of concrete were piled near the fence, and the excavator had to maneuver close to the property line to access certain parts of the pool. "Look," I said, attempting to find middle ground. "Why don't we have the crew put up some additional screening along the fence line? Just for today, to give everyone some peace of mind." "Too little, too late," Karen replied, her thumbs flying across her phone screen. "I'm filing a complaint with the city about unpermitted work creating hazardous conditions." "We have permits," I said, feeling my own patience beginning to fray. "Would you like to see them?" "I'll be requesting copies through proper channels," she said primly, "along with documentation of all safety violations I've witnessed today." As Karen marched back toward her house, dragging a confused Madison by the hand, I noticed Tyler had remained by the fence, his eyes bright with mischief. While his mother had been focused on her confrontation with me, he'd been systematically loosening the wire ties that held the chain-link panels to their posts. "Hey!" I called out, but Tyler had already darted away, leaving behind a section of fence that was barely hanging in place. The afternoon deteriorated from there. Every 15 minutes, Karen would emerge from her house to take photos and videos of the work site from different angles. She documented the excavator's movements, the placement of debris piles, and what she claimed were dangerous projectiles, actually just small pieces of concrete that occasionally flew when the demolition got particularly aggressive. Around 2 o'clock, Tyler discovered that the loosened fence section could be pushed aside like a door. While Karen was inside making what sounded like a very animated phone call, probably to the city's code enforcement office, Tyler slipped through the improvised opening and made a beeline for the excavator. "Hey there, young man," Bill called out, once again shutting down his equipment. "This is the second time today. We really can't have kids in the work area." "I just wanted to see how it works," Tyler said, his eyes wide with mechanical fascination. "Can you show me the controls?" "Not today, buddy," Bill said kindly but firmly. "Insurance rules. But I'll tell you what, when we're all done and cleaned up, I'll show you some of the attachments we use, from a safe distance." That's when Karen exploded out of her house like a guided missile. "Tyler James Henderson!" she screamed, her voice carrying enough force to stop conversations 3 houses away. "Get away from that machine right now." But Tyler, emboldened by his successful fence breach and intoxicated by the proximity to heavy machinery, decided this was his moment to explore. Instead of retreating, he clambered up onto the pile of broken concrete near the excavator, his sneakers sending small chunks tumbling down the slope. "This is it," Karen declared, waving her phone above her head like a weapon. "This is exactly the kind of reckless endangerment I've been talking about. You people have created a death trap, and now my son is literally climbing on your debris. Ma'am, The first police cruiser rounded the corner just as Madison's bicycle hit a patch of loose gravel near the pool's edge, sending her tumbling in a spectacular crash that would have made a stunt coordinator proud. Her wails pierced the air immediately, shifting the entire dynamic of our backyard circus from farce to genuine emergency. "Madison!" Karen screamed, dropping her phone and vaulting over the loose fence section with surprising athleticism. She scooped up her daughter, whose tears were more from shock than injury, and cradled her like she'd just survived a building collapse. Officer Martinez, a compact woman with steel-gray hair and the weary expression of someone who'd seen every possible neighborhood dispute, stepped out of her patrol car and surveyed the scene with practiced eyes. Behind her, a fire department paramedic unit was pulling into our driveway, their lights painting our house in alternating reds and blues that made the whole situation feel surreal. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Martinez," she called to Karen, who was now rocking Madison back and forth while shooting accusatory glares at everyone within a 50-foot radius. "I understand you called about a construction emergency?" "Yes, finally!" Karen's voice cracked with relief and righteous indignation. "These people have been operating dangerous heavy machinery with no regard for child safety, and now look, my daughter is injured because of their negligence." Paramedic Johnson, a lanky man with kind eyes, approached carefully. "Let me take a look at the little one," he said gently. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Madison," she sniffled, though her tears were already slowing as she realized she was now the center of attention from actual emergency responders. As Johnson began his examination, checking for scrapes, asking Madison to move different body parts, the routine assessment that would inevitably conclude with Band-Aids and reassurance, Officer Martinez turned her attention to me. "You're the homeowner?" she asked, pulling out a notepad. "Yes, I'm David Chen. This is my wife, Sarah," I said, gesturing to Sarah, who had emerged from the house with Max at her side, both looking bewildered by the emergency response to our pool removal. "And you have permits for this work?" "Absolutely," I said, relieved to finally be asked a question I could answer confidently. "City permits, HOA approval, full insurance coverage. We can provide all the documentation." Officer Martinez nodded, making notes. "Tell me what happened today." As I began recounting the morning's events, I noticed something that made my heart sink. Tyler, apparently realizing that the arrival of police and paramedics had shifted all adult attention away from him, had resumed his exploration of our yard with renewed boldness. He'd discovered our garden shed, which we'd left unlocked for the crew to access our water spigot, and was now emerging with what appeared to be my bag of lawn fertilizer. "Tyler, no!" I called out, but it was too late. In his 10-year-old logic, the white granules looked like perfect snow to sprinkle over his concrete fort. He began broadcasting handfuls of fertilizer across our backyard, creating a winter wonderland effect that might have been charming under different circumstances. "What is that?" Officer Martinez asked sharply, her hand instinctively moving toward her radio. "Lawn fertilizer," I said quickly. "It's completely harmless, but Tyler, please put that down." Karen, who had been focused on Madison's injuries, suddenly looked up and saw her son creating what looked like a chemical contamination scene in our backyard. Her face went white, then red, then a mottled purple that suggested her blood pressure was approaching dangerous levels. "Tyler James Henderson, what are you doing?" she shrieked, her voice hitting frequencies that made the neighborhood dogs start howling in harmony. "I'm making snow for my fort," Tyler called back cheerfully, apparently oblivious to the fact that he'd just escalated our situation from a noise complaint to what might look like hazardous material exposure. That's when Paramedic Johnson made an observation that changed everything. "Hey," he said quietly to Officer Martinez, though his voice carried in the sudden silence that had fallen over our yard. "This little girl doesn't have any significant injuries. A few scrapes, maybe a bruise or two, but nothing that required emergency services, and—" He paused, looking more carefully at Madison, then at Tyler, who was still enthusiastically distributing fertilizer. "When's the last time these kids had a proper meal?" The question hung in the air like a thunderclap. Madison was thin, too thin, I realized now that someone had pointed it out. Her clothes, while clean, were slightly too large, hanging loose on her small frame. Tyler, covered in dust and fertilizer, showed the same telltale signs of a child who might not be getting adequate nutrition. Officer Martinez's entire demeanor shifted. The weary neighborhood dispute expression was replaced by something sharper, more focused. She knelt down to Madison's level. "Hi, sweetie," she said gently. "What did you have for breakfast this morning?" Madison looked uncertain, glancing toward her mother before answering. I think I had some crackers." "Just crackers?" Officer Martinez pressed gently. "What about yesterday? What was dinner like?" "We had—" Madison paused, her 8-year-old face scrunching with concentration. "Mommy said we were having a special diet day." Karen, who had been building toward another explosion about Tyler's fertilizer adventure, suddenly went very still. "Madison, honey, why don't you come over here with Mommy?" But Officer Martinez was already asking Tyler, who had abandoned his fort building to join the conversation. "What about you, buddy? What have you been eating lately?" "Mom says we're being eco-friendly," Tyler said, with the matter-of-fact tone that children use to repeat adult explanations they don't fully understand. "We're reducing our food footprint, but I'm really hungry a lot." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the demolition crew had stopped their cleanup work, sensing that something significant was happening. Sarah, who had been quietly observing from our back porch, stepped forward. "Kids," she said softly, "would you like some sandwiches? I was just making lunch." The way both children's faces lit up at the mention of food told us everything we needed to know. "That won't be necessary," Karen said quickly, her voice tight with panic. "We have food at home. The children are fine. We're here because of the dangerous construction situation, not because—" "Ma'am," Officer Martinez interrupted, her voice carrying new authority. "I'm going to need to ask you some questions. Tyler, Madison, why don't you go with Mrs.—" She looked at Sarah. "Chen," Sarah supplied. "Sarah Chen. And yes, let's get you both something to eat." As Sarah led the children toward our house, Karen made a desperate grab for control of the spiraling situation. "You can't just take my children," she protested. "This is about construction violations and liability issues. I called about dangerous machinery, not whatever you think this is about." "I understand why you called," Officer Martinez said carefully, "but when we respond to a call involving children, we have to assess their overall welfare, and I'm seeing some things that concern me." "Concerns?" Karen's voice cracked. "What concerns? My children are perfectly fine. We're going through a temporary financial adjustment. Their father, my ex-husband, there have been some support payment issues, but this isn't about that." Bill Henderson, who had been silently observing the transformation of his worksite into a family services investigation, cleared his throat. "Officer, should we pack up for the day? This seems like it might take a while to sort out." "Actually," Officer Martinez said, glancing around the yard that still looked like a war zone, "I think we need to understand how this whole situation developed. Mr. Chen, you said you have all the proper permits?" I nodded, grateful to be back on familiar ground. "Everything's documented and filed properly. We notified all the neighbors weeks ago. The crew has insurance, we followed all safety protocols." "Then why?" Officer Martinez asked, looking directly at Karen. "Did you feel this constituted an emergency requiring police response?" Karen's face went through several color changes as she struggled to formulate an answer that would justify her 911 call without admitting that she'd essentially weaponized emergency services in a neighborhood dispute. "The children were in danger," she said finally. "Immediate danger from heavy machinery and construction hazards. They could have been seriously injured or killed. By playing in their own yard? No. By trespassing on the construction site that these people failed to properly secure?" Officer Martinez made more notes. "So your children left your property and entered an active construction zone?" "Well, yes, but only because the construction zone was creating an attractive nuisance that drew them over." "Through a hole in your fence that one of them created by loosening the wire ties?" Karen's mouth opened and closed several times without producing sound. It was becoming clear that her carefully constructed narrative of neighborhood endangerment was collapsing under basic questioning. From inside our house came the sound of children's laughter, genuine, carefree laughter that seemed to underscore the complexity of the situation we'd stumbled into. Whatever was happening in the Henderson household went far deeper than annoying. Neighbor complaints and construction disputes. Officer Martinez's radio crackled to life. Unit 23, what's your status on the construction emergency call? She keyed her radio. D.